Hello, thanks for coming, for attending this Zoom meeting here with PXP Endurance. We're going to talk today about RPE, rate of perceived exertion, and how it can be used or monitored for your training. So there's a lot of different pieces I want to give to you. Rate of perceived exertion, or RPE, it's a subjective thing. Most of us that are doing this, we like objective numbers. Paul, tell me what my heart rate should be. Paul, what pace should I go? Paul, how many watts should I be putting out? Those very objective things are important, right? The higher the pace, the higher the wattage, usually the higher the heart rate that you can sustain, the better your performance. Rate of perceived exertion is subjective. Okay? It's influenced by those things. They're influenced by stress, hydration, motivation, desire. All those things will go into looking at this fitness monster that you're going to create, okay? Your performance. When we're going to use running as the example, just to keep everything on one space there. So when you're running and you're going at a certain pace, in general, you know that pace has a certain heart rate on the same path or same terrain. Obviously, if you're going up a hill or down a hill or on a flat, that will affect your pacing. That'll affect your heart rate. That'll affect your effort that you're giving. That'll affect your exertion that you're giving for that moment or that intensity. Rate of perceived exertion is graded or rated, if you will, between 1 and 10. Now, there are some scales that maybe it goes from 6 to 20. You know, it's kind of like your heart rate. You don't ever want it to go to 0, right? And exertion, it's never going to be, a 0 because you're doing something. I like the 1 to 10 scale because you can always use that as percentages. Okay, so if you look at 1 to 3, that's a 10 to 30% effort. That's a recovery thing. You're not putting much effort out at all. A 4 to 5, you're picking up the intensity a little bit. You're at 40, 50% effort. 6 to 7, you can follow through that. If you go to 8 to 80% and 9, and obviously 10 would be an all-out effort. The lower the number, the longer you should be able to sustain that effort, right? The lower your pace, the longer you'll be able to sustain that effort. The higher the pace, the higher the wattage, the higher the intensity, the shorter you can be able to sustain that effort. If when you're running or biking and you're going at a certain intensity, your heart rate's at a certain space, it's at a certain place, it's at a certain intensity, what is that perceived effort? Okay, so there are times when I'm out running and I'm running I'm gonna call it a 9-minute pace, nice, comfortable 9-minute pace. Sometimes that pace feels a lot harder than other days. Okay. Now, that perceived effort on that, if we don't really look at the subjective side, sometimes we're going to feel bad about ourselves. Man, I couldn't even run a 9-minute pace today. I'm terrible. Another day, we're running that same 9-minute pace, and it feels really light and easy. And so we really do this to ourselves, but you should. If you're going to follow it, if you're going to give yourself something negative, you might as well give yourself something positive. If you're running that 9-minute pace and it feels lighter than normal, you should say, wow, I'm more fit than normal, and give yourself some credit on this side, but it's really not what it means. Okay. There are days when the same effort or intensity that we use objective numbers for feels easier or harder than normal. If you can correlate heart rate, perceived intensity, pace or wattage, you now have 3 different perspectives or 3 different viewpoints on your fitness. Okay. All 3 of those ideally are lined up. So if I run a 9-minute pace and my heart rate is at 130 and it feels like I'm running at a 60 or 70% effort, so a 6 or a 7 on the RPE scale, then great, that's all lined up. If I go out and do that same metric, pacing and heart rate, but it feels like an 8 or a 9, Well, now I'm wondering, why does it feel so bad today? Maybe it's rest. Maybe it's my motivation. Maybe I'm just having a great day. Maybe my hydration and nutrition's off, but it should spur something in you to look at what you're doing that day relative to your objective measures. I think sometimes we get so locked down into wanting the objective measures that we forget to look at the quality of the workout or the other pieces that would influence those objective numbers. Not every workout's going to feel great, right? And you guys have all had those workouts that feel, wow, this is a great day. I wish I could keep doing this pace, this intensity, because it feels so light. And then you've had the opposite of that. Oh my gosh, that workout was so terrible because of how it felt, the rate of perceived exertion. So let's talk a little bit more about the RPE and some practical sides, because you can maybe judge it for yourself of percent of effort, but let's look at what's happening to your breathing. Okay. So we call it a talk test. If you're at a 1 to a 3 in that area, right now I'm at a 1 or a 3. I can talk normal, everything feels comfortable. I can do this all day long. The effort really isn't that high. I get into a 4 to 6, and there's a range in here because of, you got to look at the intensity, and there's a gradient, there's a continuum going on. My effort would be high enough that I'm talking in shorter bursts. I'm getting phrases out. I'm not really able to talk the same as I'm doing right now. I've got to pause to get a deeper breath. If I'm in that 7 to 9 range, I'm barely talking. I'm maybe getting grunts out. I might be getting short phrases. Yes, I can. Words, syllables. It's pretty intense. A 10, a max effort, there is no talking. You're focused on breathing. Talking isn't going to happen. So you could use a talk test to help you subjectively get into where you're at on that evaluation of yourself. Okay. Now, my 8 is going to be different than your 8. My 80% effort might feel different to you for your 80% effort. And so you learning what those different numbers mean to you relative to your objective numbers is most important. You're not trying to compare, well, he was running at 8, I got to run at an 8, because they're subjective. We both get to have a different opinion of what they are based on what we're feeling and how we're feeling that workout or that moment. Okay. I'm going to pause for a second. Those of you that are here, does that make sense? I see some heads nodding. That's fantastic. Great. A couple thumbs up. That's wonderful. Okay. So let's go into the next space. How do we truly apply this? So let's use an example workout. So let's say I've got an hour run for you. You've got a 10-minute warm up and a 10-minute cool down. So that means you've got 40 minutes of work. In that 40 minutes, you've got 1 minute at an RPE of 8, and you've got a 2-minute RPE of 4. That would mean the RPE of 8, I want you going about 80% effort for a minute. And then I want you to have 2 times the amount of rest that you worked. So it's a 2-to-1 ratio. And you're going to bring it down to a 4, which is a low aerobic, maybe easy recovery, but you're taking your time and trying to recover from that effort. If that 80% effort was hard to sustain, it turned into a 9, so which means that you're barely talking or you're not talking. Well, that 1 minute might have been too long for you. If you're at a minute and you're like, oh, I can hold this a little longer, but it still feels like an 80% effort, then that duration is too short for you. If I gave you a 2-minute recovery, but after the first minute, your breathing is like mine is right now, you don't need the full 2 minutes. And so your fitness is different. And so we could adjust either of those. We could adjust the on time, or we could adjust the off time based on how you're feeling. Okay. So as you're going into some training, you're going to see early on that you'll have maybe 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds of on, or you're trying to get it up to an 80%. Your heart rate's not going to respond that fast, but your effort in that time should respond. And then when we evaluate it, we're going to track what happened to your speed, what happened to your heart rate, right? And if you can't control that, or if you push that intensity, maybe you went too hard and you couldn't sustain that effort for 30 seconds, well, we need to back that off a little bit. Or if you sustained it well, we would pick it up a little bit. And that's where we would work together to talk about where you're truly at. Or you would use if we did a similar workout, the next week, or an opposite week from that, you would compare how well you did in those efforts. So we might spend a couple of weeks doing a 1 minute effort with a 2 minute break, and then see how you did the second time doing that. And then maybe bump up to 90 seconds with a 2 minute break or a 3 minute break, depending on what the ratio we want to be, and continue comparing and building that intensity up. As you're developing that intensity and movement, from a coaching perspective, it's important that you're feeling the quality of that work. So here's what I would not want you to have for that 40 minutes. If you started out 1 minute on, 2 minutes off, and you were getting that 8 out of 10 and it was going well, but at your 8th rep or your 5th rep or your 3rd rep, you couldn't sustain that effort, I would tell you to stop. If your efforts turned into a 60% of it, you're trying really hard, but you're not going with it, the quality of that workout's not working, I would tell you you're done. You don't have to go the full hour, because what you're doing, if the intent of that workout was to push the threshold, to push the intensity to a certain height for a certain duration for a certain number of reps, you got about halfway into that, and now the quality backed off, but it's and you got 20 more minutes. And so in your head, you're like, I got to get 20 more minutes or I'm a loser. You're missing the point of the workout. And so as soon as you would start to fall off of what you're doing, what you're able to sustain, I would tell you to tap out. And then the next time you do that work, see if you can get more of that. And so it's a way of building your fitness or tracking your fitness by, and let's put real numbers on it. Let's say you got 4 reps of the 1 minute on, 2 minutes off. And on your 5th one, you really couldn't, you were working really hard, but your pace wasn't getting up to the same. The heart rate was maybe spiking even more and just felt terrible. Stop at 4. The next time you do that workout, see if you can get to 5 or 6. That's not you being a loser, that's you being smart. In class, we talk about great form, great technique, doing that up to whatever dumb, crazy number we call it in terms of the reps on this. Same thing on these intervals. If the quality of the interval is not there, if your cadence starts to fall off and you turn it and it's turning into a jog, but you're going to jog faster or slower, and it's only like a 10-second difference of your pace, or maybe a 5 or 6 beat different on your heart rate, you're not getting the workout or the intent of that workout for that day. And let me pause there for a second. Does that make sense? So sometimes we may have something prescribed for an hour, but you do it for 30 minutes. I would prefer that than the hour where you're getting 30 minutes of junk miles or junk effort. You're just going to push yourself into some overtraining space. Okay. Now, as we start looking at RPE long term, okay, so let's say that we've gotten used to efforts and we've correlated that to pace and we've correlated that to our heart rate. If we start to see that our effort, and we'll use 8 as the effort, starts to see that our pace backs way off, we can't get our pace up to that at that same effort. It feels harder to go the same pace. Or at that same effort, our heart rate is spiking. It's going beyond what it typically would. That's an early warning sign. You're tired, perhaps going into some overtraining. So again, it's another way for you to evaluate, oh, I don't suck because I can't get to this pace. It's a, hey, here's a warning sign that maybe I'm going into overtraining, or maybe I'm more fatigued than I think I am. Maybe I didn't get enough sleep. Maybe I'm not hydrated. Maybe I don't have enough nutrition. Maybe a lot of different things. But it should give you pause to see why that is. And when you see that trend happening multiple times, the alarm bells need to go off. You're heading into an overtraining and overuse. And you can see that early by using that subjective, how does it feel? You know that I like smart jocks. A dumb jock would simply run, 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 run. He said, I've got to run. He said, I've got to run. He said, I've got to run. And you push the intensity, you push everything, and you just keep grinding. It doesn't feel right. It works really hard. You think that's how it's supposed to be. It's not. And so you can avoid a lot of pitfalls, potentially injuries, potentially overtraining, by correlating your objective numbers with how you're feeling using this RPE scale. Last point I want to make, and then we'll open up to some questions if you've got any there. Last point I want to make, most people don't work out hard enough and they don't work out soft enough. They spend the majority of time doing a moderate effort workout. They're getting their heart rate up, they're getting their pace up, but it really, everything looks like this, steady state. When you spend all of your time in that moderate effort, you're missing a lot of the training effect that you should be getting. So the short intervals, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, up to a minute, those short things, and it's all relative depending on what event you're training for. Those are important to push that intensity, take some recovery off of it, push the intensity. Those should be hard efforts. Your 8 will be faster on a 1-minute effort than your 8 on a 20-minute effort. Okay, so if you're doing something for a minute, your 10, let's use 10 because it will go all out. Your 10 effort will be a lot more exhaustive because you don't have to go very long. It's a different energy system. As you push that same effort to a 20 minutes, you've got to back off a little bit. It's still hard though. But in your recovery, if it still feels like your pace hasn't changed that much, or your heart rate hasn't changed that much, or their effort hasn't changed that much, you're in that moderate zone. So now you're just doing everything aerobically, perhaps, or maybe everything's threshold, depending on what you're doing relative to your body. This steady state workout all the time is not best for your fitness monster that you're trying to create. You need some really slow things. You should need some really hard, powerful, short, bursty things. And if we spend the majority of our time doing one of those two things, the rest of it usually takes care of itself. But again, most of us spend the majority of our time doing that moderate effort because it feels good. We're impressed that we can go a certain pace for a certain duration. And look, we just did an 1.5-hour jog. We did a 2-hour bike, whatever. And here's our intensity. Here's our average watts. And we get caught up into looking at those objective numbers. We don't want anybody looking at Strava and seeing that we really only averaged X watts because they'll think less of us. But if they dug down into your data, they would see you spiked it higher than you've ever spiked it, and you took time to actually recover off of it. Your performance will improve a lot more than that. Then your ego needs the boost from having the sexy average numbers. Okay, so that's again one of the pitfalls when you start doing this in your training. If you're looking at what everybody else is going to see or think about relative to those average numbers, sometimes that's not all it. Your training. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second. We'll see what kind of questions have come up. How does this apply to your training? What insights have you seen as you've looked at these? I know you guys have used RPE in the past because I've put it on your schedules. If you're not careful, the teacher's going to call on you.
What was the question again? I'm sorry, Paul.
Have you tried to correlate, those of you that have tried to correlate the RPE within your training, what have you noticed? What are some things that you've been challenged with? What are some things that have gone well? Has there been anything like that?
So I'll just throw out, Paul, because you threw that term at me not long ago. And what I find is, for me, is there are just a tremendous number of variables. You mentioned you need enough sleep, you know, and it's like, it seems that, am I wrong in thinking that you have to have a fairly long or large body of data to be able to kind of figure out exactly where you are?
Yeah, exactly. One data point doesn't give you the picture that you're looking for. So you're looking at doing this continuously. If you're out running, I would love for you guys to get to this place. You're out running and you feel a certain effort, you feel a certain RPE, you should go, my heart rate is, take a guess, look at your watch and see if you're close. You should know where that's going to be. Same thing with your pacing, same thing with your wattage if you're on the bike. With enough practice at this, you'll be out on the race course and you know if you're going too hot, if you're getting ready to burn things up based on your effort level, based on what you've been doing in training. And it may just be one of those days where, you know, things aren't aligning. You're putting out the same wattage, but for some reason you're just not able to sustain it on that day. Your RPE will be a better judge to help your performance overall than simply looking at that objective number because you're supposed to be at that number. But yeah, doing it one time doesn't give you much. You know, this is going to take, you know, multiple efforts and multiple practices to pull it together. And then when you do see the correlate, the other pieces, you've got to figure out what the cause was. Why did that go up? Why did it go down? Why did it feel easy? Why did it feel hard?
I was thinking more like 100 versus 10.
It might for some of us. I'd love for you guys to get thousands because you're doing every workout that you do. Do you guys find it, I mean, from the objective side, you know, it's easier to look at a heart rate, be told, hey, you should be working at heart rate intensity X because it's in this zone. And so you move yourself and you make that effort work with that objective number. That correlates to a pace. Those two objective things, it's easier to look at. Most of us are type A individuals. We like that. Tell me exactly what to do. This is subjective. And then we get the doubts and fears about, are we working hard enough? Am I doing enough? We're simply looking to do this as a correlation.
I think so. That's the point that I was going to ask. Like, how much can I use heart rate and zone as an objective proxy for RPE? Like, what seems like there's a stronger correlation there than with watts and speed and pace, because a lot of other factors. But that rate of perceived exertion is very directly tied to what my heart is doing, my body is doing. But what's the danger of trying to really tie this together?
Yeah. So many pieces inside that. So let's take RPE out for a second. When you're going at a certain pace on the same grade that you've run before, your heart rate generally is at the same level, right? So if you run a 9-minute pace and your heart rate's at a 140, when you go run a 9-minute pace on a similar terrain, it's going to be usually about 140. What we're asking is, on this particular day, or what is typical for you in terms of how much effort is that? I use RPE. Here's how I use RPE. It's an evaluation of my form. If I'm out running and I'm running a 9-minute pace, it feels a certain way. My heart rate's in a certain area. So I'll not look at my watch. I'll run out. I'll run that same intensity. I'll look down. If I look down and my heart rate is higher than normal and my pace is slower than normal, but I feel like I'm at the same intensity, it's a form issue for me. I'm working harder to go slower. So I do a check-in, Maybe it's my cadence, maybe it's my stride, maybe it's because I'm not engaging and I'm just not running well. I look to tighten that up. I get about another quarter mile in, and then I look down, and usually what happens is it feels easier and I'm going faster and my heart rate's dropped. And so you can look at how hard you're working for that same intensity. And that's really what it is, right? So you're looking at this intensity, at this pace or wattage. Here's how it generally feels. When I'm sprinting, it feels like this. When I'm sprinting, this is as fast as I can go. When I'm sprinting, this is where my max heart rate goes. Now, if I put that same effort in and I look down on my data says that I'm not sprinting at that effort, I've got to figure out why that is. Maybe I'm putting a lot of effort into it, but I just don't have the energy. I'm not motivated. I'm dehydrated. I'm tired. I'm stressed. If that's the case, then I give myself a break. I'm like, still worked really hard. If it's not, for me, I know it's usually technique and form. And so I use it to pull back on that side. Matt, did that help answer your question, or did it just add more confusion?
I think it helps. I mean, there's no easy answer to this, right? It comes with years of practice and paying attention to how you feel.
Yeah. And if we can look at doing all of the evaluations in terms of your objective, your heart rate, your pacing, and then add how does it feel in there, you get 3 different perspectives on your fitness machine, on your fitness elephant, if you will. You all know that analogy about 3 blind men, touching the elephant. They touch the different areas and they see different things. But we're just looking at your fitness from 3 different angles. We would love for those all 3 to line up. To be honest with you, if I can get 2 of those 3 to line up on it every day I have a workout, I'm excited. Sometimes it feels good and my pace is good, but my heart rate's off. Or sometimes it just doesn't feel good, but my heart rate and my pace are right on.
Well, what I was going to talk about or mention, you asked if we use RPE at all. I tend to use it primarily when I swim, obviously, because we don't have direct data, I mean, you could have heart rate data, but generally speaking, you're not thinking about that or looking at it while you're in the pool. I don't do that so much as on the run or on the bike, but maybe that, again, because more type A, so we like the numbers in front of us. So, but RPE for me works out really well in the pool, especially, if we're doing different intensities. I'm trying to kind of feel my body and see what it's doing or how it's working at any given time. But that's just me, and obviously everybody's a little different. But yeah.
And so real quick, I'm gonna put a plug in for form goggles, because now you can use RPE and actually see what your stroke rate is, what your pace is during a lap, at the end of each lap. And so now you can have that same objective number, pacing. It's not going to give you heart rate, but you can talk about your cadence stuff relative to your RPE, similar to what you would have on your bike and your runs. Okay. Quick plug for form goggles, but again, RPE, you use it in your swim, you get done, and then you look at your pace. Sometimes you do that and you're like, wow, I thought I was working hard. I thought I was working harder than or going faster than that because of how hard I was working. That's what we're talking about.
Gotcha.
What else have you guys got to have on this? Okay, good. This is not intended to be you hear this one time and you've got it. I'd love for that to happen, but this is something you got to practice and then correlate to you individually. And you're using subjective input, subjective interpretation of that input, and then you're correlating that to some objective measures, your heart rate, your pace, or your wattage, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing it in the swim, you're doing it to your regular relative pace. Okay. And then over time, you get to have a viewing of what's typical for you. And ideally, what we're going to see is that you're working at the same intensity or same effort, but your pace is going up. Your watts are going up for a similar duration. And the thing I love about it from a coaching perspective is that it gives us a couple of different metrics that you get to help me determine when we need to back you off, right? So if on training peaks, you get that little subjective interpretation, and if you hit that and it says I worked really hard, but we start seeing that your pacing's not there, then I get to see that you're maybe getting into overtraining. If you're feeling this, then you can help. You simply say, hey, Paul, I think I'm getting into I'm really tired. And we have that, and we avoid getting hurt, getting overtrained, going down in a negative spot. But this is something you got to practice. Okay. Any last statements? Thank you. If you do have, those of you that are watching this, if you do have questions, shoot me a text. Let me know what your thoughts are, and we can clarify those.